we also have this incredible intervention in the show, which is the Archive of Modern Conflict, which is full of people. It's like it's like a kind of repressed bubble of
it's a very interesting space in the middle of the show. It becomes, for me, when I walked into it, being familiar with what they do, but in the middle of the show, because the show there's a lot of work in the show in general, but when you walk into the room specifically, and maybe it's just me, but I feel very at home. I feel very.
This says more about your home than it does about our show.
I think it probably does, but
yeah,
it feels
bombs
very
hanging from the ceiling at home, do you?
Well, bombs here and there, but the way that the images are stacked from floor to ceiling, it's for me, it's not claustrophobic, and the way that it's kind of like it's womb-like in a way, and the way you sort of walk into it and you're surrounded by visual imagery. I mean. Would you like to sort of talk a bit about their involvement and how does the reception of their room in the show, was it difficult to sort of deal with in terms of the way that the exhibition is laid out from their side?
There's two things to say. I mean, on the one hand, from the very beginning, when we conceived the show, we always wanted the archive to be in it, and we wanted their collaboration and participation. And we, from quite early on, thought, wouldn't it be great if it was in the middle of the show? Rather than having a sort of separate show somewhere else that you sort of, in another space that you experience, wouldn't it be great if you sort of walk around the show and then you discover this kind of room as if, and it's interesting with the architecture of Tate, there is this huge central space in the exhibition suite that's usually kind of the first big room, but you can actually block it off so that you see it, you only go into it from the back. And this gave us the opportunity to put something kind of quite substantial. And we felt that on principle, if you're doing a show about history and memory, the museum shouldn't assume that it knows best. And inviting another institution to kind of make a counter-argument or a counter-proposal seemed like a way of saying, there are 100 ways of doing a show about war. There are so many ways of thinking about memory, there are so many ways of dealing with the past, that it's extremely arrogant for a museum to propose one and leave it at that. So we thought, okay, this is like a deflationary tactic, but also one that enables us to do something which we haven't done before, or very, very, very rarely at Tate, which is to give carte blanche to another institution. And it really was carte blanche. We had a really important kind of link curator, so David Mellor, University of Sussex, was both helping us with our show and helping the archive with their show. So he was the person with both halves of whose brain knew what was happening. But apart from that, they had completely free reign to do what they wanted. And personally, I think it's extremely successful. And it for me, it slightly deflates the incredible the weight and kind of rigor of the show in a good way, because you get round to that point, and when you see visitors going inside, they actually smile. And there's not a lot of smiling in the show for obvious reasons. There's a lot of very heavy subjects. There's a lot of complex and controversial material. And then you walk into the archive, and people's first response is to smile, because suddenly they're seeing history. You said it's more like your house. It's history as many people understand it, which is maybe having a grandparent who still has some medals in a tin, or have maybe an album of objects, or maybe relatives who could remember things and tell them about it. And there's a fantastic kind of, you were talking about the layering of images on the wall, but there's a sort of layering of history in general, which is that it's more how everyday history works in the everyday, which is that we don't organize things very precisely, that we stumble upon them, we find them. You might be walking around in the streets of London, you see a plaque that says something happened here in the 17th century, and then 5 seconds later you see something about the Second World War, so the archive's intervention is to remind us about the vernacular, to remind us about this completely different layering of history, but also to remind us that it's okay to kind of smile and laugh and go, wow, really, they really did that. They really had these books about how to make food out of stale crusts, and how to cook with lard, and all these kinds of weird things that are in that section of the show that are important historical artifacts. But it's really important to make clear there's not just old bits of rubbish in the archive. There are amazing photographs by Kappa, by Lee Miller, by Don McCullin. There's really fantastic things. Boris Mikhailov. There's fantastic things, but they're layered.
Yeah, I was surprised to see how many objects they had, as opposed to photography, which they're sort of.
It's really interesting the different kinds of things that they managed to cram into that room. It's a really great space, and we really enjoyed our collaboration with the archive. It was a dream for us to be able to work in that way with somebody else, and they did the most amazing job. Their team, Timothy Bruce and Ed Jones, they did such a great job. They really worked hard as well. They got a lot into the space.